I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like Live right here on Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're doing as well, at least as could be expected. Peace and greetings to those live in the chat. To those who will check us out later, peace and welcome to you. Balagoon, yes sir, salute. Franny French, oh, you know what? I think I owe you an email response, and I apologize for that. There's a number of folks I haven't gotten back to, and I think you are one, so I apologize publicly for that. And to all the others I have been slow in getting back to, I apologize. Please do forgive me. And look at Balagoon. I thought you'd been a member, my man. Anyway, peace. Welcome, everybody. Definitely reach out, retweet the link on hit your socials up, tell everybody to jump in. We have a number of guests coming through this morning, all throughout the morning. I think sprinkled throughout the morning. Brother Kaba is on his way. Peace, Obioma. We have a number of guests as well coming in to talk, of course, about Dr. Bobby Wright. And this is in part in response to, and honestly, forgive me for this too. I keep doing this. I have a real problem with this, but in response to Bunchy Shakur is coming back, in response to his last visit, right on Human Rights Day. Yes, indeed. Okay. I'm bad with days like that too. And my cop out is, I live these days every day, so I don't remember any of these days. But the reality is, I'm just bad with commemorative days as well. I was going to say I remember my wife's birthday. That's about it. But children too, of course. Anyway, so we have, but in response to a couple of comments, because as I said, I do often after an initial greeting, I stay out of the chat during the show, but I do try to go back through and look for certain things and then respond to comments that come in the YouTube section or to get emailed to me. And there were a number of critiques that came in from our discussion a week ago with Bunchy Shakur involving that ended up being about Dr. Wright and Black social theory and whatnot. And one of them was basically saying, after a few initial, barbs or insults thrown at me, the point really was, more importantly, that we hadn't really gotten into Dr. Wright's work, which I agreed with. That point, at least, I agreed with. So we're going to remedy that a little bit today. It's been a couple of years since I've led a discussion on this, so that'll be. I'm happy to return to that. So we have a couple of Dr. Wright's peers and scholars of Dr. Wright, and then and of course Bunchy Shakur coming back, and Brother Kaba will be here, and we'll get into that as well. Yes, indeed, endeavoring to be happy wife, happy life. No doubt about it. Shout out to Ear Doctor Ball Out. That's right. Yes, indeed. Grand Rising as well, Amante. So we're going to get into that. And in the meantime, because honestly, I was not entirely sure. Shout out to well, for now, I'm never sure to what extent this person wants public credit. So I just always just say shout out to the Double O African for helping produce and find some guests for today. Given that this is more their wheelhouse and expertise, I certainly appreciate that. But I figured, so let's do this. In the meantime, there were a couple things that I thought we could get to as we hold it down in the Boom Bat Breakfast hour here at Black Power Media for the Remix Morning Show crew, which of course will be back next Tuesday. And on Monday, I was intending to get into more of this as well, but we can at least start with some of this today. I did notice, I haven't been honestly checking out Dear Brother Roland Martin's show a lot lately. And I didn't do it again here, but was this why I ended up there? I might have just been checking in just in general. That is possible. But I was actually curious if any changes had occurred to his front page presentation and what I've talked about previously regarding his promotion of the buying power mythology. And at first I was thinking, because admittedly, like anyone, I'm hoping to make some sort of impact, and admittedly, I'm having about as much as I could have expected. But I noticed that if anybody remembers, and I can put the link in the show notes if anybody is interested. But earlier this year, I had done a short video on this issue because I had been asked. It doesn't happen as much anymore, but for a long time, and certainly when the Buying Power book came out, I had been asked a lot about, for me, a lot. Why don't you on Roland Martin's show? Go on Roland Martin's show. As if it was up to me, first of all. Like I could just, say I want to be there and it happened, which I always thought was funny. But I said, I would happily do it, but I've just never been invited. And then I started to look at and want to maybe consider why. Now, his name has come up in some of the research previously on the issue in terms of being part of the Black commercial journalist class that uses the concept of buying power to attract corporate revenue, ad revenue. And it used to be right on his front page. So I went back and looked and what I think is the updated front page of his Unfiltered show. And, just scrolling through, and there was nothing here about that used to be here on the front page about why you should support Roland's show. And, and including reference to the buying power piece. So I said, wow. So I said, maybe this is some sort of perhaps, I don't know, shadow influence, where maybe enough people had asked or raised the question that he wanted to take it off the front page. And I was, having a little celebratory, personal celebratory moment about it. But then lo and behold, a couple clicks later, if you click, maybe it's not on the front page anymore, but if you click the join the Bring the Funk fan club, where you can get all his PayPal and Cash App information for supporting the show. That's where you find the old reference. Still right there. So I was just curious, and it is still there, just albeit a little bit more buried. Where again, he's explaining, how his audience, his reach, his breaking news, fiery commentary, hot button topics, intense debates. He's all over, Facebook, Periscope, YouTube, IGTV, so on and so on, so on. Corporate sponsors corporate sponsorships, he says, are available for those entities who want to have their respective brands promoted in front of an ever-growing audience that is largely made up of millennials, Gen Y, and Gen Xers. All of this presents a unique opportunity to bring the African American community, which according to Nielsen wields $1.3 trillion in spending power, a daily news program that disseminates information ignored by mainstream media and brings diverse perspectives to a landscape that largely marginalizes them, end quote. So anyway, it's still there, albeit not on the front page anymore, but still demonstrating the same purpose and message, and what the actual and actually demonstrating more honestly what the concept is meant to be. That is that which attracts ad revenue from corporate sponsorships. So it's not a projection of actual economic strength. It is certainly not a measurement of wealth. At best, it could be summarized as historically being a number representative of all the total official income or the total documented income of all of Black America. But to suggest that if Black America spends every penny that it brings in, that this is somehow power, or that economic power is the ability to attract corporate ad revenue, that is where the definitions and the problems occur. And that's one of the main reasons why I think in outlets as important as Martin's is or could or should be, why we get the perspectives politically we get from them, and certainly the economic analysis we get from them, just broadly speaking. So anyway, so I just wanted to check in on that, and there's an update on that. Brother Kaba's in the building. Good morning. Good to see you, sir.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, brother. Good morning, everybody.
How are you? How's the family?
Oh man, everybody's great, man. Feeling great. The kids are eating all the time. They're always hungry. I try to see if they want to take a day off from doing that, and they still continue to want to eat every day. My father used to always ask me, when I told him I was hungry, he used to say, "Didn't you eat yesterday?" I tried that with my kids, and I guess it didn't work with them either. So here we are, brother.
I tell my children all the time, they missed the era where people didn't care about their children. Right around the 90s, people started actually caring about their children.
Yeah, that's true.
And you can't get away with that stuff anymore.
Not anymore, man.
All of those rules are broken. Like, I hear you on the same thing. Didn't you eat yesterday? Isn't that enough?
Yeah.
And even my mother was a Depression era baby. She grew up in Depression, like the food, so bread lines. So she was like, we could stretch a loaf of bread for a week. what are you complaining of? And I was always like, what does that got to do with me? Like, what?
Right.
So yeah, I tried the same thing. You all ate yesterday. Stop it. And they're already on the phone to child services.
Then it doesn't quite go over well. They know the number. They got it on speed dial. Just hit
snitches.
Hit one on the phone.
It's the era of snitching. Everybody's snitching. So they're like, yeah. So that didn't work. Anyway, man, what's going on, man? I also have to admit, man, this is the second week in a row I'm not hearing your show before my show. This week on Mondays, 3 to 5 p.m. on WPFW. We had, this is a bad excuse, but like I have like a delicate schedule. And when it gets upset, like my whole, all my routines get off, and we had a number of issues pop up this week that just threw my schedule off. So I missed it again, man. And but I did want to ask, because I know you are familiar with the work of Dr. Wright, have covered a lot of his work and related on your program. So I was as a segue to talk about Dr. Wright this morning, I wanted to ask and get an update about what's been going on your show. Again, on the mighty WPFW 89.3 FM, Washington, D.C., Jazz and Justice African Deep Thought Edition. Mondays 3 to 5 p.m. But anyway, what went on this week, man? And then let's certainly get into some Dr. Wright.
Yeah, I had Baba Kiari Teule Hekama on. He's Baba. He was a publisher for a while here in DC. He actually published his company was a kind of I guess a niche company, a publishing company. It was located out of Richmond for several years. Native Son Publishers, and Baba Kiari. He honor of publishing for both Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark. So he published books for both of those two giants. He was widely respected for, like, he's kind of like one of the writers. People like Toni Morrison and others have respected his work. So he was on, but he's been living on the continent now for several years. So every now and then we just have these wide-ranging conversations just around different things that I just enjoy having, where there's not necessarily a rhyme or reason per se, but we just kind of touch on different things. So it's just a good conversation just to have, kind of intergenerationally, to build with an elder, from the continent, from an African, worldview. So it was a great conversation. So we have those every now and then. Right on. It was good to have them on.
No, I like those.
It's kind of like the one I had. I think you mentioned.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, it was kind of like the one I had. I think you heard this one that I had with Baba Kojo in the community, and we just talked. He's just a Baba in the community, and he's like 84 years old, and we just talked about whatever, his love of books and things, because I'm a bibliophile, but when you go to this man's house, I mean, literally, you cannot see the walls because there are just books on every single wall in this man's house. He doesn't own a television. He said, I threw my TV out, so many years ago. And he jokes sometimes and say he doesn't have a mirror because the last time he had one, it was an old guy looking back at him. So he said he decided to throw away the mirrors and the TVs. I think I may start to do that too. I was going to say, I was starting to. Yeah, I was starting to think about my situation over here. How much of that can I get away with over here? Yeah, but so you got the Abraham Lincoln joint though, man.
Oh man, yeah. But actually, you know what, man? This is going to sound terrible, but I'm actually in some ways feeling differently. I feel like I'm aging like a fine wine. I feel like I'm getting better. So I kind of enjoy looking at myself, and I don't mind the gray. I just wish I had more that could turn gray. but listen, actually, before we actually do get the seriousness and our other guests start to show up, I did actually mean to ask you about because and I don't mean to make light of this, and I don't know, the childishness comes out admittedly in this one, but the Smollett. I keep wanting to call him Jussie Smollett. I know Dave Chappelle messed me up.
I know. Me too.
But the verdict came out. All but one charge found guilty. Basically, the jury said you lied. You set this whole thing up. We don't believe your story. And I know there's serious ramifications. I already see like Fox News is loving this. I haven't, I see more Fox News hits on my timeline, than ever, because they just all of a sudden want to talk about race and sexuality and politics. So I guess that's what the algorithm has it coming up in my I don't know. But I'm like, all of a sudden Fox News is just loving, and then I've seen in Twitter, some of the see, that's why, and then all the I know there's a left version of this, which I'm not really talking about right now, but the reactionary version of identity politics, that's why we can't, all the fake woke and all that stuff. So people are clearly loving this for other reasons. Mine are just the silliness of the whole thing, of why would you do this and why would you set up, what are you chasing? Like, but anyway, did you have any thought? Did you pay any attention to this?
I really didn't, but I did. I just saw the end result, and I saw what y'all were talking about the other day with some of the people who were trying to defend him and say, "Well, you shouldn't believe the police." I agree that you shouldn't believe the police, as a general rule. But I mean, this is the whole story was just so ridiculous, man. This is like, and then I saw like the Black Lives Matter, global network, come out saying stuff about, that we should never trust the police. And they were saying Chicago has this long history of policing from Mark Clark and Fred Hampton. I'm like, yeah, but this dude ain't no from he's not Mark Clark. You can't. I mean, how dare you? That's blasphemy. Yeah. Like you put this dude in the same category as Mark Clark and Fred Hampton. Like, you really gonna do that? And so it gives fodder to the people that you were talking about, the reactionary right that you're talking about, because you start putting ridiculous stuff in the same breath. You trying to make this comparison between this guy and something that's really serious, and then you end up dismissing. I don't even care what they think. I'm talking about the people who don't know, who are still trying to figure this thing out,
right?
Trying to understand, the political situation better. And now they're looking at it like, yeah, that is ridiculous. Because most people are like, this is nonsense. And so now you're going to try to throw that in there, and it's gonna muddy the waters and really kind of delegitimize for people who don't know. For those of us who are clear, we're clear. It's going to delegitimize our whole struggle, because you're trying to equate this guy who's just a buffoon and just a clout chaser, with those with real serious politics. And I think, speaking of Chicago, we talking about Bobby Wright, a nice segue there, which really shows why Wright, and it talked about the fact that we need a good social theory, and the fact that we need to have our own perspective and not get caught up in, well, the right is saying this, so we got to jump behind such Jussie Smollett. No, we have to have our own worldview, and your worldview is best distilled by the fact that you have a good social theory that you're working with, a good ideology that you're working with. A friend of mine and I were just talking about Kwame Ture the other day, who's my friend of mine who actually is in Chicago. And we were talking about, just how wonderful he was. And I said, and it occurred to me, I said, well, the real deal behind him is he had a social theory. Like, he had a framework that he was working from, that he was able to kind of use as a lens to kind of like interpret the world. And that's something that people really don't look at, I don't think, closely enough. And that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation today, because that's the biggest impact for me that Wright, kind of gave to us. And then people like Bell and others later, Derek Bell and others later would come up with certain theories. And then now we talk about critical race theory and all that other stuff. But it was people like Wright who way back in the 70s and early 80s was talking about those kinds of things. And, so I just think it's a great segue, as to why the Smollett case is an exact reason why we need to study people like Bobby Wright.
Absolutely. I was thinking that already. You've mentioned Doc Ben and Doc. What happened?
So I peeked in the chat and somebody it was that M Bold wrote, "No Jussie, no peace." Oh my God. Y'all nuts, man. Y'all are nuts.
That's funny.
The internet, man. The comment section on the internet, just no matter where you go, is like the place to go, place to be.
I speaking now that you got me in the chat, I agree here. AB Baraka. I think it is a serious story that requires a serious discussion of the cultural ideas that informed his decision to attempt to run that hustle. I actually agree with that. Again, getting over the jokes and the pettiness and the silliness and the immaturity that I'm still dealing with, for sure. But because I do think that's right. I mean, as I sort of alluded to already, there is this whole thing of what a number of different things. What in this society that values not only celebrity, but the attachment of broad ideas and ideologies to celebrity, and that rewards celebrity or produces celebrity based on the projection of certain politics and ideas, even symbolically. So like there is, what would push somebody to do that is worthy of deeper discussion, et cetera, and no doubt. But
to the extent that we engage, well, I was just gonna say quickly, to the extent that we do engage these kinds of things, that's really the way that we should do it. Is that way? If we're gonna engage it seriously, that's not the way that it's being engaged, in the lamestream media.
And by the way, I think this is because this has come up previously that this is sort of to the extent I understood the comment. This is again broadly my approach to wanting to discuss pop culture or celebrity in the first place. That it's not to just give it more attention than it deserves, but it's to try to the extent possible, bring some substance to it and have it be able to guide us in some other kind of direction. And again, this our class has just ended, but I'm sure in the spring, this case or something similar to it will come up in my classes. So it's always good to be able to get the immaturity out, maybe here or elsewhere, and then quickly, and then address it more substantively here, and then certainly in the classroom. But anyway, but you've already, as again, we are expecting a couple guests to jump in here throughout the rest of the show. But with Bobby Wright, you've already mentioned. And before I forget again, Doc Ben and Dr. Clark. And in trying to reread and read anew an article from one of our guests, it was brought up that, and when I was reminded of the fact that there are a number of luminaries with whom Bobby Wright agreed and disagreed. And one of those disagreements was with Dr. Clark over the incorporation of, as Clark put it, not seeing a contradiction between nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and socialism. And Bobby Wright disagreed with him on that, as he did with Du Bois, who he said lost his race consciousness and suffered from menticide by the end of his life, getting all into that socialism. And these are things that I would want to bring up. These are the ongoing. And
he also criticized the Panthers too for that, for similar reasons. He said they started off talking about whatever racism, and then they started chasing class and ass or something like that. He said he would say. So he made some, his critiques were pretty strong.
And that's something I will always disagree with. I mean, as I said before, that there are a number of bigger names, even some I've come in contact with. I remember, in fact, oh man, because I actually really don't. I think those kinds of critiques are really reductionist and dismissive and unfair, and don't do much service to helping people understand why people end up. Even to the point made by Brother Baraka about the actually, I keep assuming. Forgive me. I keep assuming that's a Jamu Baraka. I might be wrong. Forgive me. It could be. It might be somebody entirely else. It might not even be a he. So forgive me for that. I'm not really entirely sure. Forgive me but as Comrade Baraka said in the chat, even with the Smollett thing, I think that there are levels of seriousness we can bring even in criticism that help better understand why people would end up making decisions, even if we disagree with those decisions. But I remember being on a bus with Black activists and journalists in Zimbabwe years ago.
Now, was this a bus going between DC and Baltimore?
Yeah, by way of by way of Harare.
Okay. This is on the continent. Okay.
Yeah, no. And this was the point. And on this, there was a variety of ages. And I was somewhat in the I guess in the middle group, some younger, and then in this case, an older brother, I guess an elder,
Was that me?
was saying, huh?
I don't know if it's on my end or
Are we
yours.
lagging?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I
You
don't know if it's
you
on
seem
my
to be
end or
lagging
yours.
to me.
Okay.
But I don't know. I can't really. I seem to be fine on my side, but that may not be true.
Okay.
But the point I'm getting at is that it was similar to the story I shared about that with and similar to the sentiment expressed by Haile Garima one time in front of me and some students in his bookstore. But this brother somebody else on the bus, who's actually, his name I don't remember. He's a reverend from Chicago, actually. Who I don't remember how we got here, but the point was Kwame Ture came up. And he said something like, and fake people like Kwame Ture, who when everything got hot, he ran to Africa and hid under Miriam Makiba's skirt. That was his line.
Wow. Who said that?
I can't remember his name. He's a reverend. He was on this group, this junket or whatever we were on, this black journalist, activist, whatever. And this is in 2002.
Wow.
And I had been quiet the whole time, but at that moment I did speak up, and I just said I thought that was unfair. I mean, we don't have to agree with the brother, but that's really an unfair. And then I made the point that there are people younger here in particular who may not know any of the history, and that's no way to fairly introduce somebody to a discussion of Kwame Ture.
Right.
And that's sort of my point. So like when I see things even in the work of and about Bobby Wright, where he would say dismissive things to your point about the Panthers or Dr. Clark or Du Bois, I think that is unfair. Not only, obviously, I have a political bias, obviously, of course, but I think it's unfair to why these people would end up making the decisions they made and reach the conclusions they reach. And then I also think it's often, particularly in terms of Du Bois, I think it's off. Like how anybody could argue Dr. Clark lost his race first perspective just because he talked about socialism. Is I think I just never understood that. Doc Ben said the same thing as well about Clark. But even with Du Bois, it seems like
I remember that.
Even
I remember when you interviewed Dr. Ben, the irascible Dr. Ben. Oh man, that was
and it was a beautiful day.
If you want to see Dr. Jared Ball get spanked on the radio hear it, I felt for you, brother. That was a tough one, man. Dr. Ben was not an easy person to deal with.
No, and it was funny because we spent the whole day together. We spent the whole day. Like I went to his class that he taught at Harlem Hospital to doctors there. We went to lunch together. We had this really pleasant afternoon, and then we get back to his apartment and turn the tape recorder on and start the interview. And it almost was, I mean, honestly, it was a little bit of a switch, and everything that he felt about, what he thought about me and my complexion and Du Bois. And I mean, he went in. And like I only had half the interview left after the whole thing. So even what's it's still up at imixwhatilike.org, but that's only half of the thing. And and that was one of the points. Yeah, go ahead and finish. No, I was just so we did, and one of the points that he did make was that Dr. Clark got too off into the whiteness with the socialism. As of course did Du Bois and many others, and when I raised that line that is quoted in the article from one of our guests coming up this morning, that Clark saw no contradiction between being a Pan-Africanist and a nationalist and a socialist. Doc Ben not only denied that Clark would have ever said that, but he said if he ever did say that, he was wrong. And I was getting it was at the end, Doc Ben was older at the time. I don't mean anything like that, but Yeah, so I took the spank. I mean, I just sat there. I was very quiet. I'm not gonna argue with the man. So I just, everything he had to say, I just
felt for you,
happily,
man. I really
it
did,
was
man.
worth it though. It was a great day.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, it was, yeah. You were basically like, I'm gonna just take this ass whooping, like one of them old school joints, man.
I
Like,
mean, what option is there? What
I
else?
mean,
What would I do? Like, what would
he made you go pull the switch down from the. I don't know how to the degree that people, but I'm from the South, man, and we used to have to go pull
he
our
said,
own
go pick
switch.
the switch.
Go pull your own, and you better pick a good one. It was some wild holdover from, captivity stuff that sometimes bled its way literally and figuratively into some of our disciplinary actions. I'm so grateful I'm not doing that to my children at all. But yeah, man, it was pretty rough. But I remember one time I did security for him back in Norfolk in the 90s. And it was he was in rare form. He was saying some stuff, man. Had the people, I mean, he had people just up in arms, and he doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on everything he said. It was just like, wow. And it was very tough. Yeah, but Dr. Ben was he was one of a kind. Yeah. He was a brilliant man.
He was,
and just an example of the fact that he was, we're all human, man. We got, we have human characteristics,
first of all, I get it,
and all of that.
I see the trajectory I'm on, and if I make it to that age, I will happily be as grumpy as he is.
Oh yeah,
it's coming. No, so it's all good.
And there's no hater like an old, super old hater.
Oh yeah,
was one of the and or you definitely
absolutely
on the way.
And I can't wait. I can't wait for somebody one day, some young college student, to interview me about somebody else. Because that was because that's that was the nature. Because I was doing my thesis on Dr. Clark. That was was how I came to interview Doc Ben. So and especially now looking back, I understand even more why he would have responded the way he did during that interview. And definitely one day somebody will, I'm sure, want to interview me about someone else, and they're gonna get it. They're gonna get it too. I'm gonna spend the whole day with them, and then I'm gonna bring them back to the spot, and then they're gonna get it just the way Doc Ben gave it to me. So I get it. It's all good. But listen, let's elevate our discussion a little bit of all of this and of Dr. Wright by bringing in our first guest, Professor DeReef Jamison, who, among many other things, is an associate professor at in the African American Studies program at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He has written about in a number of journals and outlets, and his research attempts to demonstrate the connections between Africana intellectual history and social science. And he has written, at least among other things, a chapter that I was reading as quickly as I could before the show, The Right Way, Bobby Wright and the Construction of a Critical Race Psychology. Brother Dr. Jamison, welcome. Good morning. Greetings to you. Welcome. And thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning. Peace.
Good morning.
Jared, I had to say, I do have to say, I saw that the Dr. Ben one too. And I tell the story all the time. He said him edit freedom ways. Dr. Clark socials him edit freedom ways.
So, yeah, man. I mean, buddy. Oh yeah. Oh, so oh man. It was listen, hey folks, do yourself a favor, go to imixwhatilike.org, search and check it out, check out the interview and have a good laugh. You will learn. I mean, it was a great discussion, but you'll have a laugh, certainly at my expense. And I just wish I had been able to maintain copies of the whole thing. It's just one of those unfortunate I don't know, losses to the histories. Anyway, but Professor Jamison, could we just start, because I know you've done a good amount of work on Dr. Wright. Could you just start with some basics about who Dr. Wright was, his background, how he came to be who we now know of him to be? And then we can get into some of the details of his argument and the construction of Black social theory. Thank you.
Yeah. So with Bobby Wright, I guess the first thing about him is that he was a good country boy. So he was from Hobson City, Alabama. And Hobson City, Alabama was actually founded by his grandfather. So a good country boy from Hobson City, Alabama. And then, he moves to Chicago, went to the university, got his PhD from the University of Chicago. But even getting his PhD from this elite school, University of Chicago, he never forgot his rural roots in Alabama. And that's one of the things I try to talk about in the papers, how he still kept his rural roots in Alabama, like these Southern one-liners that he was always used. And I think that's kind of like why part of his magnetism and his charm of how people were attracted to him. But he's been a truant officer. He was a teacher, course college professor. He'd been a school psychologist, even a mental health administrator, and of course, a scholar. And he was involved in many organizations, National Alliance for Black School Educators, the National Black United Front Political Action Conference in Illinois, National Black Independence Party, and of course, the Association of Black Psychologists. And in 1982, when he was up to be the president for ABPSY, the Association of Black Psychologists, that's when he made his transition, and his student Kobe Cambon took his place as the president of Association of Black Psychologists. And of course, also he had his own mental health center in Chicago.
Right on. So wait a minute, he was a truant officer. I can't. That would have been a terrifying experience to have Bobby Wright come find you if you're not in school. Like I'm just imagining that.
You gotta go to school. How you gonna make it if you don't go to school? You know how you had that high voice, right? So how you gonna do? These white folks don't care nothing about you. So yeah, I can imagine. I wouldn't want Bobby calling me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of, now that you mentioned, it's kind of like the Tyson effect. Like the voice doesn't match the fury behind it. Right. It's like it's misleading. You might be misled and think it's something and it's not. And anyway.
And I just want to make sure, because I know we're going to get into some of these other things, but I just wanted to throw this one out there. Like you say, his voice, and then some of the things he would say. So it's this famous one that ties in really what I call the critical race consciousness, but how he does it in this way, like this Southern Alabama way. So he has this one line. He said he was watching Notre Dame play DePaul, and so they're coming down and they got the ball, and he said the man said, "Here come the Irish! Here come the Irish! Five black boys!" They said, "Here come the Irish!" And so he was saying we didn't see any contradiction in these 5 black boys with the Fighting Irish across their jersey. So yeah.
No, and again, I know our audience loves when I do this, but in the context of world football, I was trying to make a similar joke recently about the French national team, which is a Pan-African collection of the greatest of France's colonies, right? It's like this all black team from all over the African world playing somehow for France. But it's the same thing. And I don't know why Brother Kaba is struggling with me. It's the same concept. I'm just applying Bobby Wright's analysis to world football. That's all.
One example was enough. One example was enough. We didn't need to. The next thing you know, we're going to have a Mama's Biscuits breakfast. And we don't need that.
Are we going to come to that? Because I want.
He's always trying to bring in this soccer that they call football.
Well, that was world football with the great bosses of whiteness in the North Americas like to call soccer. But that is a good point, Brother Kaba. Let's start that way. What would Dr. Bobby Wright have thought about an interracial funk band playing funk in Western Maryland between 1997 and 1999? What would his analysis be? No, how would he have broken that? No, anyway, okay. No, but seriously, so in all seriousness, let's how did he come to develop what he would just want to describe his black social theory, the concept of menticide? What was he saying, and why was it necessary, and why is it still necessary maybe to distinguish what he said from other more popular approaches to understanding the black experience?
Well, as a psychologist, and I think he would call himself a race man and a race psychologist. And I heard y'all talking earlier about this, how his concept of race first and how that led him to critique certain people just because they looked at like a class analysis along those lines. But I think one of the biggest things for him was that he said Black people have to define themselves. So Black people defining themselves, and Black people, and that's part of the Black psychological movement as well, recognizing that to some extent Black folks had lost their mind by internalizing these Eurocentric worldview. And part of that internalizing came from what he called menticide, which was the deliberate and systematic destruction of an individual or a group's mind. So if you can have genocide, then this like this deliberate and systematic destruction of a people's mind. And he thought that a social theory, or at least a psychology that was aimed at based on the African worldview, that would ground and that could counter menticide. But without a psychology that was grounded in a Black social theory that was in the best interest of Black people, then we would still be suffering from this menticide. And another one that was important too is that he always talked about retreating from analysis of the victim. So even if you look at his the slim book, The Psychopathic Racial Personality, that's him critiquing white supremacy and saying that Black people had to retreat from analyzing themselves and let's analyze the oppressor. Let's analyze the people who really have the problem. So he took the World Health Organization, their definition of what a psychopath was, and said that, kind of like the connections y'all were making earlier, and said that if I look at your own definition of what a psychopath is, then that's what you are. That's what white supremacy and whiteness is. Yeah.
So I wanted to admittedly, we're not going to play the audio from this, but I wanted to just show the video. I used to use this in my classes all the time. It's from The Corporation, the documentary that came out in I think 2001, and it just had a 20th anniversary I think remake came out early this year, but they haven't fully released it, and they didn't. Anyway, but what, the point that I at least use that the documentary does make, but that I like to focus on when I was using it, is that when we talk about corporations and their dominant influence in our society, in this world, in fact, what we're really talking about is white supremacy, or the ability for a white elite to legally form and work in anonymity and then have the legal protection of personhood within at least the United States. So that, and then when the documentary makes the point that they go through the history of how corporations became legal people and protected under the 14th Amendment, chief among how that 14th Amendment was used to get there. The documentary does something that I think is interesting, and they go through the DSM-4 to show how corporations, which again are legal people, fit all of the criteria for a psychopath.
Right.
They do everything that they operate in society with callous unconcern and incapacity to maintain enduring relationships, reckless disregard for the safety of others, deceitfulness, incapacity to experience guilt, failure to conform to social norms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when we were getting ready for today, I just thought of that and thought again of what should be, or could be for me, maybe others, a renewed importance of the work of Dr. Wright and understanding how this society works, because as he's talking about, white people engage Black people as psychopaths. They are psychopathic in their engagement with Black people and the planet and the rest of the world, and need to be understood as such. And if corporations are their legal personhood and representative that allows the individuals to operate in anonymity, then we should also understand that when we're dealing with the corporate world, this is what we're dealing with. Menticide organized, if I may put it that way. Anyway, so I was just...
that's a good one. And I think it's interesting too that in critiquing we're here to talk about Bobby Wright, but in critiquing Bobby Wright and some of the race first, that what you're saying would still tie in with, I guess, adding the class analysis to that. So when he talks about menticide, he also talks about how there are social, what he calls them, he said there are institutions that support white supremacy. And I think what you just showed like that psychopathic nature in institutions that maintain and support white supremacy.
Yeah.
Just
And
to
I
be
think
clear,
too, when it comes to
Kaba, real quick. I'm sorry. Kaba, I'm sorry. Just
Okay.
real quick. Just to be clear, I don't want to say that what I've done rises to the level of a critique of Bobby Wright. If anything, it's a critique of his critiques of others. That would be all I like. That one little part, I do admit my bias causes some reflexiveness with anyway, but that was it. I just wanted to say, sorry, brother Kaba, go ahead, man.
No, I was going to say just real quick about that whole corporation piece. One of the things that I thought of was the fact that laws. A lot of times people think that laws are like the egg or whatever came first or whatever, and then they create consciousness. And for me, I believe that laws come out of the consciousness of a people, and then that perpetuates, that consciousness. That's just my thing. But I say that because that may explain this whole notion of personhood of corporations may explain the fact that why people get so upset when quote unquote looters, loot, corporate buildings and offices and things, because to them, in their minds, in their twisted minds, they believe that they're actually attacking a person, so to speak. So it's so that may because the way they respond to looter, it's like they're looting. Oh my God, it's like they're killing kids, and that's what it seems like to us. The way they, we would respond that way if they were actually, looting a village of people. The way they did us and the way they did everybody else that they came in contact with. That kind of thing. Because those are the real looters. Are doing. Excuse me. Yes. So yeah, that's interesting. But I did want to go back to Dr. Wright, because you mentioned him being from Alabama and having this. Do we know how he actually formulated this kind of consciousness to even think about doing the things that he's doing, or doing the things that he did, or coming up with the theories that he came up with? Like what formed him, informed him, I guess, in terms of that?
So I went to Florida A&M University for my master's in psychology. And that was, it's probably the only African-centered psychology program in the world. And the chair for the longest time was Kobe Kambon. And Kobe Kambon, his mentor was Bobby Wright. And so Kobe, he's from Jasper, Alabama. And then Bobby Wright's from Hobson City. So I'm saying that through Baba Kobe, what I learned was that they said being in these all Black environments, that they never felt this idea of white people being superior to them. He said, like, the grandmama, the mama, the daddy, Black businesses, all these this all Black community. So they saw Black people who were self-determining Black people in those communities. So I think that that's part of it. This idea of just seeing all his life, seeing Black people do things for Black people. So yeah, I would think that was like one of the roots of it. Yeah. And I know Baba Kobe used to say that he didn't have to go to, like, people would talk about going to Africa, and he would say he didn't have to go to Africa to see Africa. He saw Africa in Jasper, Alabama, in that form of communalism, collectivism, those type of things.
Right on. So the formation, or the social theory that he forms, let's talk about what that means and why it is, or how it is distinct from other approaches. I did see, before I left the chat earlier, I think it was Ricky Ryan had pointed out that for people like Kwame Ture, or even to a certain extent Du Bois, at the end of his life, their Black social theory was Nkrumahism, Touréism, or Pan-Africanism under scientific socialism, or something like that. But what was it that Wright saw as a flaw with other worldviews or approaches to this struggle, and what was his conclusion with what he defined as Black social theory?
And Jared, if I can I'm not going to pull it up, but I want to read a certain section from the paper that kind of like sets the context up. Okay.
And just real quick, because I see he's here, we're going to bring Bunchy up here. Yusef Bunchy Shakur is joining us. I wasn't entirely sure when everybody was going to come on in, so we just bring them in as they come on in. Greetings, brother. Good to see you again. And welcome to the discussion. And just jump on in whenever you like, man. Dr. Jamison, this is Yusef Bunchy Shakur. I don't know if you've all met, but greetings and welcome. And anyway, please.
From Detroit, what
please go ahead. Yeah, yes, indeed. Right on.
All sorry, I thought I had.
And what page are you reading from? Can I read along? What page are you on?
Yeah, I thought I had it. Hold up real quick.
But anyway, as he's getting that together, Yusef Bunchy Shakur, the activist organizer, was on with us last week and created all this mess and bringing up Dr. Wright and Black Social Theory. And had us, had me getting beat up in the comments for what we did and didn't do. So
why we call it mess? It's not mess.
No, the mess was. I'm just joking. The mess was just around the discussion about the comments and stuff like that. That's all. Of course, it's always a good excuse or reason to continue the discussion or deepen the discussion.
So Jerry, you're just on page 7.
All right.
In Black Vision. The roots of contemporary African American political ideology.
Got you.
So Dawson posits
or maybe I do. Yeah, sorry.
Mm-hmm. So Dawson posits that Black political ideology / social theories must answer the following questions. And I'm thinking maybe we can frame some of the Bobby Wright social theory around these questions that he posed. But so how are Blacks' position in society explained? And what specific roles are assigned to race, class, and gender? 2, who or what is the enemy? 3, who are friends and with whom is one willing to form alliances? 4, what attributions are made about the nature of American society and the state? 5, what is the nature of whites? 6, are whites too tied to the benefits of racism to abandon racism? 7, are whites basically good and able to become willing partners in the quest for racial justice? And then finally, what degree, if any, of either tactical or strategic separation from whites is necessary? So Dawson puts that out there as what a social theory should look at. And I think we could look within that context of how Bobby Wright hits on some of those.
So
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Book chapter.
I was saying, can we follow that up with what Bobby Wright said, which is a Black social theory determines the destiny of a people by establishing guidelines of life. It defines their relationship with other living things. It defines values and rituals, methods of education, how enemies are dealt with. These are the exact words from Bobby Wright, which is somewhat paraphrasing what you just read. Yes,
indeed. Yeah. And so I think on that one, when we think about, so I think Bobby Wright's issue with the Du Bois piece, I have the quote in there from C.L.R. James, but I think that he saw any type of class analysis, meaning that you would have to have some type of interaction or alliance with white people. And he wasn't down with that.
Yeah, so I mean that would be one thing. I never got that, or I never got that as a prerequisite for having a class analysis, even within a Pan-Africanist or even a nationalist context. And that's why I always liked how Clark would put it, that this contradiction didn't exist between Pan-Africanism, nationalism, or socialism. That even within a nationalist autonomous all Black or African state or organization, socialism just means the redistribution of the wealth that is created. So and the prevention of groups within that group abusing others or exploiting others as a class. So that part I would always, because I think to this day, within the nationalist community, there is an issue with class that allows for a lot of the arguments that come out of that community about what we need to do about the problem to be limited. Misunderstanding how class functions, or even how capitalism impacts communities. But that said, go ahead.
I think this is the importance of what Bobby Wright called with the Black social theory, and I'll refer back to the question or the comment Malcolm made one time, like before there can be any Black and white unity, there has to be Black unity. So at the time and the position, what he's saying is, and if we truly understand our history as the position of Menticide, of the internal and external oppression that we've suffered from, that we had to close ranks. And in closing ranks, we have to examine ourselves and develop. Like, everybody has a social theory. So the point of me reaching out to you is, again, and where I'm at in studies and throughout college, we're referencing other social theories to determine Black life. That is not a problem per se. The overall problem at this stage of our development in this country, we have no position of really defining. We're fragmented. And I don't think even with Bobby Wright, it wasn't totally done yet. It was in the process of being worked out. So me revisiting and wondering, is there other like-minded individuals who are thinking on this line at this stage? Where is a Black social theory? Because also Bobby Wright says, if you look at Black people, we find the answers in our struggle. We find the answers in examining Malcolm X, Ella Baker. So that is the foundation of creating the Black social theory.
Yeah, and I think that Jared, I'm more on the right side, as in Bobby Wright. However, I have evolved in a way where I have over the years appreciated the class-based analysis, particularly within our community, particularly within Black people's community. Because as far as like class across the board, where it's white class and Black, and we need to like get together in terms of each other, the lower class, and because white folks are going to be white folks regardless of what class that they're in, generally speaking. So that's always been my perspective as far as that's concerned. But I think for me, what really kind of got me to look more in class is the fact that there were Africans, or are Africans like the Touaregs of the world, who did identify as socialists and do identify as socialists, but they ended up turning it and doing kind of like bringing together that African worldview, or at least Africanizing, their worldview, because they saw that there were limitations in terms of the traditional ways in which socialism, communism were espoused. And we can go all the way back, and we can talk about the people. What's my man's name? The so-called Black Socrates that actually influenced Clark and Ben and others. We talked about him. We had the author on the show who did the 2 volumes on his life.
Hubert Henry Harrison.
Hansberry.
Hubert Henry Harrison.
Hubert Henry Harrison.
Hubert Henry Harrison.
Right. Hubert Henry Harrison. And then others who would subsequently come. They started to kind of look at those particular ideologies from a Black lens, and I think that would be more useful. And I think probably that was the issue that Wright had more with the people who were looking at it from a more traditional perspective. And I do know that he still came at Clark, which I thought was unfair, because Clark definitely was not in that camp. But I think at that particular time, we have to also remember too that Wright was a fairly young man, when he passed away. Like and it kind of like what if Du Bois would have only lived to be a young man? We wouldn't have seen the Pan-Africanism that he ultimately evolved into later on in his life. So I think we also have to keep that in mind as well. Somebody like Bobby Wright, I think probably would have and could have evolved, and had a much more nuanced analysis in terms of a lot of these things.
No, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's a really good point and a fair point to make. I do want to, as our guests do start to slowly come on in, we do have one other guest joining us today, a colleague and a comrade and a peer of Dr. Wright, among many other things. Our next guest is an educator, a cultural activist, born in October 1931 in Macon, Mississippi. His great aunt, raised in slavery, lost 2 fingers to her master for attempting to read. Our guest's parents, Amanda Beasley and Squire, were graduates of Bolivar Training School in Mound Bayou, Mississippi, migrating to Chicago, Illinois, where our next guest attended Forestville Elementary School at DeSable High School, graduating in 1948. And on to DePaul University, and then ultimately to the University of Chicago, where, along with Dr. Wright, our next guest put in and continues to put in a tremendous amount of work on these issues. And of course, I'm talking about Dr. Harold Pates, who joins us now as well. Good morning to you, sir, and welcome to our conversation, our round table. And I guess what's turning into though it looks like you and I suffer from a similar fate, so to speak, in terms of our hair. I was going to say it's a barbershop conversation, even if you and I are just sort of hanging out and watching. or maybe getting our shape ups over here or something. Maybe getting a little shape up over here. I don't know. But anyway, good morning to you, sir. It's good to meet you and have you join the conversation. Greetings.
Good morning.
So we've been just chopping it up about Dr. Wright and his work and how we interpret his work and some of the disagreements he has had with some of the luminaries. So I just invite you to offer up any introductory comments that you might have about how anything about your experience with Dr. Wright or how he constructed his Black social theory or his approach to Black psychology. Or anything else that you want to start us off with?
Yes. Dr. Wright, and I suspect, I think he was born in 34, and I was born in 31. And of course, I did not know him all during my developmental stages. And I met him when I, along with another one of our peers, in the 1960s, we decided to have a national conference. And this conference, we created an organization called the Association of African Educators. And we invited notable persons from around the country to attend in Chicago. And the conference was held at Metropolitan Church in Chicago, and it was about 2,000 people attended. It was an extremely successful conference, and not only did we have some of the scholars speaking, but Muhammad Ali attended, and it was
wow.
He came and made a few statements. As you know, Muhammad was quite popular, and he made a few statements. And as a matter of fact, he was kind of poetic. I don't have a copy of the poem that he stated. Had I known I was going to mention this, but I have it. I have it in the report of that particular conference. It was quite witty and um, quite characteristic of how of raps. As a matter of fact, it was sort of like a Muhammad Ali little rap statement. But anyway, out of that conference came the development of the Association of African Educators. And we also created what we considered to be an alternative educational institution that we called in Chicago the Communiversity. And the Communiversity became very, very popular. And as a matter of fact, it still exists, um, and it meets every second and fourth Saturday in Chicago, um, chaired by a brother named Olamenji. And back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the Communiversity supplied most of our students who existed around the country the opportunity to really open up and see a side of our existence that they really needed to know about. Now, Bobby Wright was in Chicago. He was a very activist psychologist, and he had not received at the time that we met. He had not. Neither he nor I had received our doctorates because we were active in the street, and Bobby was very active. He organized a group. Imagine this, called the Black Teacher Caucus, and that caucus had about 8 or 9 very activist brothers in Chicago, and what they would do is have kind of like extemporaneous conferences with Chicago public school teachers to kind of bring them up to a level of where they would no longer see the black community as a problem. We had Bobby used to call that he used to call it um, um, well, analyzing the subject, or what do you call it, victim analysis.
Mhm.
That's what he called it, victim analysis. And he says, look, we can no longer talk to people out of the context of the premise being the black community is the problem. The statement was very relevant at that time, and with his operating with the Black Teacher Caucus and calling meetings at the time, and with me along with another brother who was a scholar named Dr. Thompson, we began to create kind of like an alternative educational context in the city of Chicago. Now, the whole purpose of that particular context was to make sure that we put the brakes on the analysis of our people and what we were doing as accepting precisely what white scholars had done, and that was to look at the black community as a problem to the society. So then, therefore, victim analysis was very, very popular. And I could name a few of our notable scholars that you probably have read who accepted that victim analysis and wrote quite a few works using victim analysis as the premise through which to discuss what they considered to be the problem of the black community.
So yeah, and please do, and when you respond or anyone else responds, please, I'm all about the criticism. Or we have our we're due for a hate awards, so I'm all up for naming those who have been messing up and being corrected if I've even fallen astray, but you know, when Bunchy, when you're asking about where is the black social theory today, or and anyone else, please jump in on this. You know, what is wrong with what's going on today? Black Lives Matter, critical race theory. Isn't it? And honestly, I mean, I've moved by you know the argument that when black people engage in the theories of Marx or Mao or you know Castro, like I don't see that as going astray or being Eurocentric or abandoning the struggle. So like where you know so in terms of that analysis today, so in other words, what is wrong with what is out there that you see happening, and where can Wright's, and by the way, isn't what Wright said what Schomburg told Clark? Like you got to study why Europeans wrote you out of history before you study. Isn't that the anyway? So go ahead, everybody jump on it. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me put it in perspective in this time frame, right? Where we at in our stage of struggle. And if you compare this to the 60s or the 70s, we to your point, Jared, we examined Cuba. We learned from other struggles. So at this stage, in the 21st century, why are we not learning from our own struggles, not only the additional to other struggles? And so for me, Bobby Wright is not the foundation per se. He created the framework, and others are part of that framework. So at this stage, when you talk about Black Lives Matter and others, or even critical race theory, so in that black social theory, we're talking about black liberation. We're not talking about fucking integration. We're not talking about none of this bullshit. We're talking about the liberation of black people. That is why it's the purpose of a black social theory, not in an argument of others, but in complimenting who we are. You can't be who you are without knowing who you are. And that is the purpose, and the foundation should be of a black social theory. And it is not on Bobby Wright's shoulders per se. He framed it in a way that encompasses all our history, Malcolm, W. Du Bois, others, right? So at this stage, we have to critically analyze all of them to produce this social theory if Black liberation is our main objective?
Anybody else? What?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have incorporated Bobby Wright's work in a pamphlet, and the pamphlet is called The Notable Quotes of the Living Bobby E. Wright. And we call it a primer on Western civilization's racial dementia. Now, one of the reasons why we did the pamphlet, let me see if I can, oh yes, there it is. This is it. And what we did was we took the notes of Bobby Wright. Bobby Wright was a very extemporaneous speaker. Those of you who may have sat in his presence, you know that his notes were written on on paper bags and wax paper and everything. So when Bobby Wright passed away, his wife came to me with a shopping bag full of craft paper upon which Bobby Wright had written notes and so forth and so on. And she asked me, she said, Dr. Pace, can you do anything with this? And when I looked at it, I almost fainted because his ideas and whatnot had been, that he had, like I say, he had spoken always from the podium and always extemporaneously. And what he did, I incorporated his 5 major ideas in this little pamphlet, and we call it The Notable Quotes of the Living Bobby Wright. And I will just take a minute to give you the 5 ideas around which Bobby Wright created his speeches. Number 1 was the idea of menticide. Menticide was the whole idea that that was a that there was a systematic attempt to destroy the minds of African people, and he called it menticide. Now, the idea that was number 1, the idea of menticide. Then he had the idea of the psychopathic racial personality. Um, uh, this is where he characterized uh, whites and Europeans as psychopaths in terms of their continual racist orientation, particularly toward Black and African people. The next idea is the idea that Black people must create and control their own institutions. And as you know, Bobby Wright had, it was called the Mental Health Center, the West Side Mental Health Center. That was his base, that was his professional base. Then the other idea, the 4th idea, was the contrast between Black charismatic leadership and white institutional leadership. He did several lectures on the whole question about um, our dependence as African Americans on charisma in our speeches. So then, therefore, we would look and seek the charismatic leader before we would accept the person who had the substance that was necessary for Black people to analyze their condition and to build upon it. And the last idea was the idea that Black people must have their own social theory. Well, along with, I mentioned the other brother who passed away, we sat down and thought about a social theory that we incorporated in this little booklet. It's called Education, and the little booklet, it's a commentary on the importance of African identity and the struggle of African American people. That's volume 1, which is in the booklet. Volume 2 is also in the booklet, and it is what we consider to be an attempt to create the kind of social theory that we need. It's called Pan-African ancestralism, toward an African first world social theory. And this is a practical essay regarding the complexities of African identity in the midst of Western oppression. Now, this is what we consider to be the incipient stage of the development of Pan-African ancestralism, which would walk along with democracy and socialism and many of the other theories that many of our African American scholars adopted from the Europeans, which were which came out of the culture and essence of Europe. So then, therefore, when we talk about Marxism, as you know, at one point in time, we had a group of brothers and sisters who called themselves Black Marxists. And they were going around, coming out of the universities, talking and speaking in the context of how people should really adapt Marxism to our operational process of trying to free ourselves. Now, of course, and I'll stop right here because I can go on.
So, oh yeah, no. First of all, I appreciate all of that, and some of those Black Marxists still exist and are still out there, and I think are still making good arguments. But I definitely appreciate all that, and I definitely appreciate the fact, and I'm very happy that at least one of those that you listed that Dr. Wright was concerned with, we've clearly overcome, which is our overemphasis on celebrity and stylish leadership over substance. I'm so happy that in 2021, as we move into 2022, we have overcome that hurdle, and we no longer are sidetracked by substanceless celebrity and stylish spokespeople. Professor Jamison, do you want to get in here? Anything you would want to add to or respond to in terms of where Wright would be, could be situated in terms of what you see happening today?
Well, actually, what I wanted to add on real quick was that Bobby Wright being, let's say, cautious or suspect of white theories is the white social theories, but also even white psychologists. So take somebody like Watson, who's supposed to be like the father of behaviorism. And Watson said, give me a dozen healthy infants, well-informed, in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll train him to become doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, beggar man, regardless of his talents and the race of his ancestors. So Bobby Wright is saying if these are the psychological theories that people are being trained in, then it's a window into white supremacy. We can look at it's almost like that old school Ice Cube, here's what they think about you. I think that was on the death certificate out, but here's what they think about you.
Yep.
So he's looking at Watson and he's saying, okay, this is what they think about you. Or even when Skinner talked about the illusion of freedom. What's that mean for a white psychological theorist to say that you can forgive people the illusion of freedom? So yeah, I just wanted to add on that that's part of like his repertoire of always being successful of or leery of these theories that come from white people.
So, again, I tend to agree with Kwame Ture's summary that a socialist analysis and even incorporating Black Marx or a Marxist theory. A couple points. One, I think when Black people pick these ideas up, to the extent that they are European or non-African, I don't accept or agree that they just become in a sort of mentally deformed or menticided way Eurocentric and anti-African. And to Ture's point, I don't agree. I tend to think that Marx is given credit for having identified the laws of capitalism in the way Newton has been credited with identifying the laws of gravity. But that doesn't mean he invented them or was the originating practitioner of an idea of scientifically redistributing to a community what it needs to survive. So I would like to see, and I still find myself in an admittedly a liminal space of wanting to bridge some of these, I think, unnecessarily divided. In other words, where Du Bois ended up, I don't think was that far from what Wright was arguing. And I think when you look at even the argument of Huey Newton's intercommunalism, it is the logical, to me, conclusion of what Wright is arguing in the immediacy. In other words, Black people needing their own approach to the world, Black people needing their own institutions, up to a point that is possible if we're talking about a center or a program or maybe even a community. But if we're talking about genuine sovereignty or liberation, there are no states to be given, as some nationalists still argue for in this context, where there is not going to be that kind of relationship. So in a sense that it's not a liberal integrationism that is being advocated, it is saying there needs to be a radical solidarity to get us to levels of freedom where, yes, then maybe levels of autonomy and sovereignty can actually exist. But in this world, and then anyway, let me just stop there and invite any responses or criticisms, condemnation, et cetera, and so forth.
Yusef, ready to get in.
I see.
What Malcolm said. I mean, like, there cannot be no black and white unity before there's black unity. And what that means is we have to close our ranks and build our relationship. So Menticide is not just the fact that you read Marxist or become a Marxist. Menticide is a product when you exclude yourself. When you don't know who yourself and you don't know how to honor that, and when you can't apply that theory from a black perspective. That's what is conclusion of a Menticide. I mean, it's not where we can't embrace anything else. Like, you can't be African if you don't know who your African self is. And even like, before we can resolve those externals, we have to resolve the issue around black and African. We haven't even addressed that internally. And so the larger context of a liberation struggle, it requires what you're saying, Jared, in terms of like thinking beyond our own individual selves. However, we cannot negate ourselves in that as well. So, like, for me as a new African revolutionary nationalist, I promote and advocate for the liberation of new African people, to be able to control and determine our own destiny. It's not at the expense of oppressing anyone else, but also, again, if we understand liberation and independence, like, other folks can come over. They just have to follow within the framework of that liberation theory. But I think we try to put the horse before the cart, which is we have to close our ranks. Like, we can have an institution, but if we don't achieve the ultimate goal of liberating ourselves and being able to free our mind and liberate our bodies, we'll continue to be on this white treadmill.
I think at the end of the day, what Wright is doing is basically telling us that we are all we need. That we don't need to have any external analyses. That we actually we're the oldest people on the planet. We have the oldest traditions. So we have everything we need, and then we can just look at the indigenous peoples of the world. And even Clark and others have pointed out, and even Marx and them have pointed out, that the indigenous peoples of the world basically had what they would later call socialists. So for me, as an African, knowing that we already have systems in place that are able to critique the material conditions and all of those things that we see now. I mean, we knew that this system was wrong, whether before we heard of Marx or anything or any of those people. We've had traditions of people speaking on these issues before. So we have everything we need, and I think that's the point. And for me as an African, I could never call myself. I would never name myself after a white person. That's just to brother Yusuf's point. I mean, even to the degree that you can use that as a tool, I don't even mind that. You can use the tools of Marx. You can use the tools of Lenin. You can use all of that as a tool. But to name yourself after them, I think is where the notion of this Eurocentricity comes from.
Sure, but that would be why Du Bois would say he was an Nkrumah Terreist, or that's where they ended up. They weren't saying
I can use this. I can use this phone. Right, but what I'm saying is I agree with the Africans that do redefine and call themselves like that. The Rodneyist piece, I like that. Du Boisian, I like that because it Africanizes the theory, you know, and so you know I wouldn't call myself a Samsungist just because I use a Samsung or whatever. But the point is, I think that to knowing that we have pre-existing models of engaging the world. I think that's something that he was looking at. And then lastly, I'll say, because sometimes people will say, well, what about Papa Doc or what about Mobutu? I saw that in the comments, and they were saying, well, they were into the black thing. But in reality, these people were European trained. So they weren't really African centered. They weren't really Pan-Africanist. You know, Mobutu was trained by the Belgians, had a Belgian, a Eurocentric education. And just like Papa Doc had a French, you know, education. These people were not coming from the same place that Dr. Wright was coming from. Just no more than right now. Going back to what we first started talking about, no more than right now, we can look at Angela Davis as an example of a Marxist or a communist. She was in the Communist Party. You know, she wouldn't be the person that people would look at and say this is an example, even though some people would try to slam the socialists by using her, and that would be unfair. Just as it would be unfair to use a Mobutu or somebody like that and say, well, see, those people they saw everything black, and, you know, and this and that, and they hated everything white, so therefore look at what they did. You know, so I think that's a little bit unfair, and it's really not a principled position to take.
No, this is sort of my point.
Again, we're not working from a black social theory. They were still.
But this is sort of my point across the board is that we're not that these camps that have evolved they're not talking to each other, and they're not studying each other's backgrounds. So we're that's why, you know, so that's why I think a lot of the context gets lost about why black people were adopting socialism or Marxism or trying to apply it. It wasn't to integrate into and valorize white people. It was a tactic and a tool. But anyway, Professor Jamison, I think you were trying to get in there. Go ahead.
Oh, and I think that's where the whole concept of Menticide becomes important. So those,
but I think what we're doing right here.
Hold on, Kaba. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the examples that you were giving, Mobutu, those type of people, they still suffered from Menticide, or like Baba Kobe's. Baba Kobe would say cultural misorientation. So to the extent that they still suffer from that, I think that's why we see that. And Bobby Wright, he even said it in the Psychopathic. He said you can have an all-black institution, right? But it can still be a white institution if those black people suffer from Menticide, or those black people still internalize white supremacy, because it's that type of mind state. So I think that's where the Menticide piece comes in as well.
Something that came up in the last conversation that I reverberated in post show comments that I wanted to bring up definitely before we wrapped up today is how did Bobby Wright in his lifetime engage U.S. academic institutions professionally or even analytically, and then how should we today? Those inside the academy, outside the academy, how should we see that engagement?
I would just say real quick, if folks take the time, there's a video I found on YouTube of Bobby Wright speaking in his own voice, right? And what was very powerful, and he told the students, like, I wouldn't advise you to go in there and argue with your white teacher. They're going to be who they are. I would advise you to go in there. What you're learning is a tool to be able to use to better advancement of black people. He also says in that same speech, our education comes from black people, comes out of our black community. I mean, so part of our critique is, so when we the things we're talking about early on, like that's what produced a Bobby Wright. You know, the Black South produced Bobby Wright, and he overstood those dynamics. Another thing he says in this, which is very powerful, hey man, we have a right to have fucked up people in our community. We should not resort to name call. I mean, like, these are very mature things that we're still wrestling with today. And you know, even at that time, you know, he's Ubuntu, right? He's acknowledging Ubuntu, but Ubuntu had not developed to what we see who he is today. And so I think Bobby Wright is not a finished product. And I think this is our job is to examine, and not only just Bobby Wright. Like this conversation is beyond Bobby Wright. And so how it, like I saw someone in the comments, someone said we need to define Black liberation because it has been co-opted. I mean, more nonprofits talk about Black liberation than grassroots folks who should argue about Black liberation. So I think fundamentally, within the context of academia, it's the same with Kwame Nkrumah. When he came here, he extracted what he could and took it back for the liberation of Ghana. Those are the same tools that or the same pathway that we have to use
of all African people, not just Ghana, of all African people. He was trying to phrase it. I just messaged. Yeah. Hey, real quick, is when Bobby Wright says Du Bois suffered from menticide, is that not name calling?
Actually, when you listen to that, he take shots at the parents. He say, left my class for some, for the streets, and for ass. So
class and ass.
Yeah,
class and ass.
Well, let me interject a point that I think is very relevant at this particular time. You see, I don't think, and Bobby Wright, of course, agreed with this 100%. He and I used to sit down. We'd start talking at 11 p.m. and wind up going home like at 3 in the morning. The one thing that the European has been very successful with, he has de-ancestralized African people. And when you de-ancestralize, you remove them from the meaning of the land as a possible, as a property, and defining them. In other words, we are African people. We are African people. Now, we might be Black as African people, but we are African people. I think we can accept that. The other thing is, you see, when we say that we are African people, we are talking about ancestry that goes back thousands of years. Now, if we accept that, then we come with an identity that makes all of these isms somewhat irrelevant. This is why when we talk about Pan-Africa, we say, hey, we're talking about all African people. We're talking about the entire African context. Now, if that is what we're talking about, then there's no need to waste time trying to argue whether or not we fit into the isms of Europe or even the isms of any other people in the world. We are as they are. When, for an example, the Indian people, when they come out with the various Brahman philosophies, it's very important to see how they place themselves and their children and the generations before and those to come into the context of being, we call them Indians. I don't think they call themselves that. But I think we need to continue to push the fact that we are African people. Yeah, we say we're Black people. Well, Black is a color. Africa, there is a land identity that all of the people that we are talking about identify with. They can put themselves on the land. I think we need to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons for which our type of oppression has been one to de-ancestralize us and remove us from our land identity, so and therefore give us a color identity. So we refer to ourselves as Black people and so forth and so on. But hey, yes, just like some of the whites might be Europeans, we're saying that African people are African people. Therefore, the African identity is extremely important to a conversation such as this. We can let no ism de-ancestralize us because we're talking about going back thousands of years. We're talking about civilized people. John Henry Clark used to really put it nicely. We're talking about a people who were civilized in the context of whatever civilization means before the European came out of the caves. Now, if that is a fact of history, if that's a fact of history, let us build upon who we are, not upon who other groups say we are. So then, therefore, if we say, oh, well, after all, we'll argue from the position of socialism. Well, okay, let's take a look at the elements of that and find out, did we have that before the European even thought to have a revolution? They talk about Karl Marx and so forth. What about the ancestralization of African people that goes back to the time prior to the pyramids, and the importation of the cultural characteristics of African people that we superimpose upon the struggles that we have had simply because of the kind of enslavement, creative enslavement. Remember now,
Doc,
we're not slaves just generally. We were commodity. We were we had redefined humanity into things. We were for the longest, about 250 years, for the longest, when you said, well, who is he? Well, he is the name of the slave master. The slave master gave him a name. Well, what was he? He was a nigger. He was everything that we've ever heard to keep us from getting to our primordial identity.
Absolutely, Dr. Pates, and I appreciate that. Your commentary has dragged out of the hinterlands of the whatever of the world. Kamal Franklin joins us, affectionately known as BKK. Brooklyn Bogarting his way into the conversation.
I thought it was an open invitation.
It is an open invitation. This is a pleasant surprise. So the only thing I would want to say as a segue, and then Kamal jump on in, is that I don't think you can read or listen to Nkrumah, Kwame Ture, Sekou Ture, Patrice Lumumba, Cheikh Diop. I don't think you could read or listen to folks like that and feel like they are suffering a de-ancestralized, menticide approach to solving the problems of African people, even as they worked with the labels at times of Marxism or socialism, and incorporated them into their work and logics. But anyway, Kamal, go ahead, man. You jumped in. Jump on in.
I'm sorry I jumped in. Not really, but I thought the discussion was fascinating and interesting. I had more questions because I felt like and it's more like me understanding where the conflict becomes, because I don't think we're saying, or folks are saying, if I study Marx or if I use history from the Vietnam War, or if I use revolutionary history from the Chinese Revolution, right, in terms of battling capitalism, in terms of the conditions that they suffered, and I incorporate that into the work that I do within the Black community, that doesn't mean that I'm adopting wholeheartedly someone else's ideological or political approach, but it could mean, because we suffer from a world system of capitalist dominance, that I'm saying, what are the strategies that liberated some other people? Are some of those strategies applicable to my struggle? And if that is the case, and if they've based that on certain readings and tech and strategies, sure. And I also read and incorporate that in a sense to get me maybe where I need to go. And it's not saying that by doing that I am throwing out Africa, throwing out African history or heritage, but it's also saying that there's some other ideas. And then two, I'm curious about, sometimes in terms of hearing the discussion, where's the critique of even sort of the African culture and way and knowledge that we need to also bring to bear? Because we're also not saying, I assume what we're saying is that prior to European invasion, even though the situation, the culture, the context was ours, they still might have been some needed internal revolutionizing, right? Because there are things that needed to be corrected. So even if we go back to our own history and say that is the basis of where we need to build sort of a revolutionary practice that frees us from white supremacy, still, that's not enough to say that frees us from all oppression, because even within the different cultures and societies, there is a suffering of oppression that was within that's going to also need some context for being liberated. So those are kind of questions, comments I was curious about based on what I was hearing.
Right on, right on.
Well, I'll start. I'll start. I'll say to your point about the tool. That's why I said earlier that these are tools, and that you should use any tool that you can. My only critique is I don't identify with the tools that other people use and call myself that, when I know that I am an African and I know that Africans have had tools that work for us. So yes, you can use any tool that you want. I just don't identify with the tool. And then in terms, as my identity. And then I would say too, which is why I'm here. I come on this platform with Dr. Ball, and I appreciate this platform and am a supporter of the platform, because you all, even though most of you who run it, you might identify as those things, you have an African framework that you're working from. I don't know what was funny with that. What was funny? I was just with those. I
never said I was no Marxist, although I study Marx.
Nobody said any of that. It's so funny.
I stand corrected. The socialism and things like that. And that's
Jerry,
he just said he reads Chomsky. He's not a Chomskyist.
I think you get the point, but I see that.
Jerry, Dr. Ben said you were socialist. That's all I know.
But
yeah, Doc Ben said I was a lot of things, and I just sat there and smiled and said, "Yes, sir." What am I going to say? I'm not going to argue with that man. All right.
Yeah, but the larger point is the reason why I support this platform is because you all are coming from the way y'all are approaching things the way that I think that if you're going to identify, if you're going to study socialism, if you're going to study, then you all are doing it the way that I think that African people should engage it, if to the extent that we engage them. So I have no problem with that. Self-critique, I think, is extremely important. And I believe that no matter what we believe in or what ideological framework we're working from, it needs to have some kind of self-critique, because that's how you're going to grow. You're going to be stagnant if you don't critique yourself. Of course, Africa had the San people, for instance, in South Africa. The Zulus were quite imperialistic to some extent. But they would be probably the exception and not the norm, whereas everywhere that the European has gone, we cannot think of any one place, whether it be the South Pacific, whether it be North or South America, whether it be the Caribbean, whether it be India, whether it be Asia, in every instance, without exception, everywhere they went, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere they went, they were the ones who were imperialists. So, but that, of course, does not mean that we don't have self-critique amongst ourselves. We definitely need to critique ourselves. And I love what particularly Amos Wilson does there. He talks about self-critiquing African-centeredness all the time, another one of our great psychologists. So I think that that's extremely important. And that's why I think these kinds of conversations need to be had, more and more, because I look at the people here on this platform. I think not just you all, but just a lot of the people who are supporters, who are bridging this gap between, identifying with socialism and socialist ideas, Marxist ideas, communist ideas, and still understanding and maintain their Africanity in the ways that Cabral was talking about, of the socialism and the culture, returning to the source. I think that's where we ultimately need to go, because ultimately it's about liberation. So for me, I don't argue too much with people like yourself, because I know that y'all are doing the good work. So just wanted to.
So I think
I don't know if anybody else wanted to jump in.
Yeah, so I think in this conversation, there's two conversations. And I think one is that old conversation of the nationalists and the Marxism. I think it exists in here. And so for me, approaching the conversation around Black social theory had nothing to do with that per se. And I think to the root that you brought up, Kamal, the point of a Black social theory, it encompasses all what you said. It's a critical analysis of our struggles. And I think starting from the point of, like, we talk about anti-Blackness, but we don't talk about anti-Africanness. You know, that emerged in the world first, and then it morphed into anti-Blackness. And right, and so being able to resolve those conflicts within ourselves. And I think, again, for me, continue to emphasize a liberation struggle. So as a liberation struggle, that is not just regulated to Black people. You know, that has transpired throughout the world. So with that framework, we can learn from any and everybody, and we should. But fundamentally, in a country such as this, going back, we talked about W. Du Bois, where he talks about the double consciousness. And I think to this day, we still suffer from that double consciousness. And so how do we resolve that conflict? And so for me, interjecting this conversation, starting with Jared, like in my school, in my readings, I'm seeing queer theory. I'm seeing critical race theory. I'm seeing all these theories. I'm not seeing a Black theory. So you give it an example such as queer theory. When I research it, queer theory comes out of queer studies. Queer studies only been around since 1989, 1990. So if I was a Black queer person, it's obvious I would probably identify in queer theory, because there's nothing else. And Black folks excluded me. And so same thing with feminism. Black women, there's nothing that they identify, so they identify with Black feminists. And not saying that's a problem per se. So within Black social theory, potentially it brings those contradictions of us together to resolve and have those conversations, particularly at this stage. Like the critical conversation of your point around the critique is we need to analyze or critically examine everybody. No one is untouched on that platform to be able to. And the foundation is Black liberation within America, but also within the global context. But we can't get to the party and say we all everybody here and just a party, but we forgetting, like, we was independent before we came to America. So why we can't be independent again? That's and then I guess that's where it falls in the nationalist and the Marxist arguments per se. But fundamentally, Black people are oppressed because we're Black. We're oppressed because we're our genders. And they said, but Black is not about a color for us. Again, we know Black is about a political identity. And understanding that political identity, we still don't want to be identified as African. Again, if I said to any one of y'all, man, what's up, you African booty scratcher? You remember that? What was that like? And we still, have that inherently within us. So it's a multitude of those things. But I think, we have to resolve those by having the conversations and being able to understand. Like Bobby Wright it wasn't a complete thing around the Black social. He interjected, and he was probably going to continue to work on it. So what I'm calling for, and there's probably some other people out there working on it, how can we work on it? Because I think that would help resolve a lot of these contradictions.
Well, listen, I know we're set to wrap around 10 o'clock, and there's obviously no conclusion to this. I would say right now, with everybody on the screen, I'm down to do this again next Friday. We could reconvene as a group next Friday and chop it up some more. Folks can add, folks can, we could replace, switch out, whatever. But this is exactly the kind of conversation I want to have anyway. Like I keep wanting to have all the time, and find in a good way, in a sense, unavoidable. So, Dr. Page, let me start with you with any concluding comments for today. And again, to the extent that you are interested, sir, you are welcome to come back. But as for now, just any responses or wrap up thoughts for today?
Yes. As I listen to the contributions, I see 5 people. As I listen to the contributions, I'm reminded of some of the very fundamental conversations that Bobby Wright and I, and Bobby Wright's group, and the groups in Chicago had on a very fundamental level. One thing we did, we took Chancellor Williams and we kind of took Chancellor Williams and kind of looked at some because he was an elder historian and having written some interesting historical concepts. Um, uh, Let me just quote one to you, and just I included this as one that I think is very, very fundamental to understanding this conversation that we're having. The black people of the world have come to at last destiny's crossroads. They must make some fundamental decisions as to a single people. The one hopeful sign is that they are slowly and painfully coming to their hitherto beclouded senses, coming to realize that they are one people with a common destiny, and that no matter how scattered over the world, the treatment suffered by one black group is suffered by all. But there is a terrible crisis of leadership at the crossroads. There's no united leadership group or any real effort to create one. The great difficulty is that black leaders, again, unlike the Jews, do not know what their own heritage is. They are almost wholly ignorant and of their own cultural source from which the independent original thinking springs that progress is inspired. The Negro leaders who spearheaded and carried on the campaigns for integration, amalgamation, not only do not know the great heritage of the blacks, they do not want to know it. They wish to draw on Caucasian heritage and become identified with it. I think this is coming from an elder naturally, and as a people, I think one thing we have to do is always draw upon the wisdom of the elders, because the elders maintain the definition of who we are. If we do not, we'll be floating in the water or dropping off the trees like leaves individually, always attempting to speak out of the context of someone else's reality. And when we interject European socialism, European Marxism, and all of the other European isms into the reality of African people, and failing to look back upon what some of our elders have said who have struggled with this problem. Because when we go back earlier and get to the days of when the real arguments between black capitalists and black communists and all that sort of thing, and fail to use as our common tool our identity that has been established um, over thousands of years, and understanding that we might be talking about social structures and so forth. How to, as a matter of fact, I had always considered Marxism a good economic theory, but when it came to developing the reality and teaching the cultural characteristics of African people, Marx was quite irrelevant, because usually culture emerges from the history of the people on the land. And I'll just say that as I listen to us talk, because I think it's very, very important not to take us back to where we were arguing in the 1920s and whatnot with Padmore and so forth, and whether or not communism or Marxism was relevant to African people. No form of European tool for the survival of their people is relevant to African people, because I think our form of enslavement was quite unique to the rest of the forms that have been present in the history of the people. We were chattel. We lost complete human identity. We were like horses and cows and mules. And to go back and reclaim our identity, our historical identity, our regal materiality, to go back and reclaim this uh, is going to require that we understand what it meant to be a chattel slave, what it meant to have lost complete human identity, and what it meant to have been in that particular predicament for almost 300 years. So I'll stop with that.
And we appreciate you, Dr. Pace. Thank you very much for that. Professor Jamison, you wanna jump
I
in?
just do real quick. I think underneath all this that we've been talking about, I think the Bobby Wright question is it in the best interest of African people? So as like we navigate and wrestle with all these different ideas, at the end of the day, regardless of what we call it, is it in the best interest of African people? And the other thing I just want to throw out there before we go is that I love that thing, the quote by Bobby Wright when he says the only contradiction among Black people is that there are no contradictions.
Have no contradictions.
And with that one, with me, that as a psychological theorist, to me, that one's important because that's how you work through the Menticide, through working through the contradictions. So I think that that's an important one, and that's what we've been talking about. Like, how do we work through these contradictions? And part of what we did today was try to navigate some of that space. So yeah, I just want to end with that. That's to me, that's what made him like this critical race psychologist, in that he wanted us to look at those type of things.
Dr. Jamison, real quick, did you know Dr. Jermaine Robertson down there in Florida?
Yeah, we
Florida
went to school together. That's my brother.
Yeah. We used to work together at Caribou Books up here in DC.
Yeah, I know.
He went down.
All of them. Yeah, I got my Caribou cup right here. Yes, sir.
Oh wow, look at that small world. Look at that. We didn't even plan that. See, that's that African.
Right.
See, that's that African.
Hey, I just want to say real quick, for me, my position of like Black social theory, it's inclusive to all Black people, Black men, Black women, Black children, Black gays, the Africans, and I think once we can figure that out, right, and to the brother's point in terms of like we have no contradiction that we can resolve, but we have not created the time to really examine all those things. And I think that's for me, that's the calling. As I going through my pursuing of my PhD, going to reading and shit, I already knew what the fuck I know prior to getting in there, right? And so not making sure I don't get go for the okie doke, and that's like, and wondering is it anybody else in the world thinking what I thought prior to me getting there, or why I'm here, and to have this space, because again, this space is not for academic, it's spaces for us in the streets, in our houses, because this is a continuum of what we've always been trying to figure out. And I think we have enough information, enough struggle to examine, to reach those conclusions that we need.
Hey, whenever I'm asked my thoughts on it, I'm very clear that you cannot go into academia isolated from political struggle, from your community, from the surroundings outside the institution. So you will get swallowed up. I don't think anybody can do that individually. And I think many people for a long time have been talking about and writing about and dealing with that particular struggle, engaging the academy with any kind of African world, radical, whatever perspective. It's treacherous in that joint. So the more we can convene like this, it is I think helpful to all of us at whatever stage we are within the academy. Kamal, you want to say anything before we get out of here?
Of course, I want to make us stay another half hour based on what I'm going to say, of course. So I don't think I have a major contradiction, but I have one important contradiction, is that I think there are contradictions between Black people. I think there is a fundamental class contradiction, which of course it may have been beared out of strongly because of European capitalism and imperialism. But I think that's an unresolvable contradiction that we're not going to win. In other words, we're not going to win them back over because we've introduced them to the cultures of Africa or our ancestors, that there are people who've decided with our oppressors, even those who consider themselves our leaders, right? Because I heard you guys discussing earlier kind of like the liberal influence, let's say, of leadership today, which surely is more about the integration of Africans, Black people in the system than it is about the liberation of Black people, no matter what words they use that come out of a nationalist tradition, actually, or come out of a self-determining tradition, that come out of a radical revolutionary tradition. Their goals through their actions tell us they're all about integration and policy. That is somehow, and I forgot who said it, is like, even if America somehow became fair and equal, I still wouldn't want to be in America. Because it's not my, I didn't make it, and I'm not trying to be in it, right? Ultimately, I am about the self-determination of African people and what that looks like, for us. But I also think even in trying to find that self-determination and going back to some of our historical roots and looking at that, there's still going to be contradictions even there between those of us who thought of ourselves as either royalty and those of us who were workers. Because I think that those contradictions will be there for us to continually have to resolve, because in the end, there is no end of history. There are going to continually be points of conflict and discussion and change. But the best part about Africa in its history was that before the Europeans, it was our contradictions to resolve and to work out. And that's a place where I think we need to get back to.
Yeah, now I'll just say I agree with all of that. You know, and I think before you came on, Kamal, I mentioned the class piece, particularly among Black people, is probably the most important piece to look at. You know, and I actually wrote a song about it. You want to hear it? Here it goes. It's called
I was about to say, you beat me to
Everybody's Not Going to Make It. I'm talking about us. Like the name of the song I did with Precise Science is called Everybody's Not Going to Make It. You know, people keep waiting for, ain't no sense in trying to fake it. Everybody's not going to make it. You know, we need the red, the black, the green for liberation. Everybody's not going to make it. Freedom's not freedom. Freedom is taken. So to your point, we have to be the ones to take our freedom. We can't vote our way out. We shouldn't even want to vote our way out of it. We shouldn't even want to have a benevolent leader or president or whatever. Like if the liberation doesn't come through us, then it's not true liberation. It's only going to be neocolonialism again, all over again, because we're going to still be experiencing freedom and entering into freedom under the guise of our oppressive system. So it's about us. It's about freedom and liberation. And I think, again, this is a great nexus between, all of these schools of thought that I think we've come to at this particular point, where we can learn from the mistakes of our predecessors, as Dr. Pate said, and now move forward with this liberation struggle.
One comment, there is such a thing as having a legacy. And I think it's upon those of us who think about this to determine what it means to have a legacy. Now, if we have been around, if African people have been in the world since the beginning, I think we need to consider what that means in terms of history, because history is determined by legacy. And I would simply say we are who we were, and that particular formula is going to determine who we are going to be. Are we going to disappear as a result of a kind of a nebulous interpretation of the legacy of African people? Because I do think that could be a possibility, particularly in this day and time, with the kinds of modern technologies that have to do with not only changing, not only adapting new technology, but also probably creating different people who will begin to think that history begins on the day that they were born. Okay. I'm finished.
Right on. No, I appreciate that, Dr. Pates. Listen, I appreciate all of you. I greatly, enjoy these conversations and look forward to many more. And like I said, we can all talk offline about doing this again next week. It's whatever, or whenever. Just reconvening, doing whatever. In the interim, definitely hit the like, shares. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna say some of the folks in the comment said that we're going to do it. Make sure it's some diversity, some women on here, sisters on the panel. That was something in the comments.
No question. Absolutely. No. That's.
I just want to uplift that.
Absolutely.
If you're gonna build on Bobby Wright, try to know who Bobby Wright was, because much of what we are saying, when you throw in European theories and theories outside of the context of, remember, he was He was born in Anniston, Alabama, and he comes out of the deep South, where he had a good understanding of what chattel slavery was. So if we're going to talk about Bobby Wright's legacy, let us do like John Henry. No, it was Pope, Alexander Pope. Drink deep or touch not the Pierian spring. Let's drink deep into this and see the relationship between who we were and who we are now, so that we don't get thrown out like a farmer has to be careful that if he's going to have a real cornfield, he's got to pick the kernels that will not germinate. He has to pick those kernels out so that will be a lasting cornfield. So I think we've got to kind of look at that. And if we're going to talk about the legacy of Bobby Wright, which of course extends into other legacies, then let's drink deep. Let's drink deep and let's continue this conversation.
Right on. I can't think of a better way to end this. As always, if we didn't get to something that you wanted to say, we do check everything. But like my man Pierre over at Comedy Hype says, please do continue.
Put it in the comments.
And we'll catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like Live. Please continue to support the channel, all the other great content coming up. Thanks again to Drs. Pate, Jamison, the almost soon to be around the corner, Dr. Shakur. Appreciate you coming through again, brother Kaba. Thanks so much to you as well. Thanks to BKK for busting in the door and getting in the conversation as well. And we'll catch you all next time.
Peace. Light supremacy, light skin privilege, light supremacy.
There we go.
Peace. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.